Hey everybody, welcome to week 4 material. This week we're going to be focusing on component modeling, the introduction to the modeling toolkit. But before we get to all of that, we are going to start with an overview/review on selection tools. Real quick, I just want to make it known that this bear is not mine. It actually belongs to Professor Boyle. All credit for the bear goes to him. All right, so let's review selection tool because we've already been doing selection for a little while now. Since we've started using Maya, we've been using the selection tool. The selection tool is this tool right here. Shortcut is the Q key to select it. It is just this. It is just when you select an object. Very straightforward, but even within just the selection tool, there is a lot of nuance to it to help you help you get the most of the tool. So for example, we can select our bear that we have here just by clicking on the actual object itself. Just so we can select the cylinder by clicking on the object itself, selecting the cube by clicking on the object itself. Same for the torus. We can also deselect just by clicking anywhere outside of our objects here. So I can just click out here in the empty gray space, and now I've deselected whatever I've previously selected. If I've selected something and select something else, then it will switch my selection from one thing to the other. I can hold the Shift key on my keyboard to select multiple objects at once. So I'm holding Shift, and now I've selected the bear. And I'm going to click and select the cylinder, and the cube, and the torus, and all of these things are selected all together at the same time. I can also select multiple things, not just by holding Shift, but I can just marquee select or just, left mouse button hold drag and select everything like that. What else can we do? Oh, I can hold Shift to deselect one of the objects that I have here. So in this case, I will deselect the cube. And now, still holding Shift on my keyboard, if I were to drag select through all these objects again, my selection will be inverted. So now the three things I've selected before have been unselected, and the one thing that was not selected is now selected. And I can drag again, still holding Shift on the keyboard, and invert my selection again, and again. And again, and this time I'll also unselect the cylinder, the cylinder here as well. So now when I do the click drag, I can just swap between selecting the bear and the torus versus the cube and the cylinder anytime I want, just by holding Shift and dragging my mouse along. We can also select objects through our outliner. Not only can we select directly here from the viewport, but we can just, let me just unclick out here. We can just select an object in here like the torus. Torus is now selected. Cylinder. Cylinder is now selected. Cube. Cube is now selected. Teddy bear mesh. Teddy bear is now selected. I can I can select one object on the outliner like the cube. Hold Shift and then select an object lower down the list like the torus, and it will select everything in between. So actually, let me move my teddy bear down here so it's in between my cube and my torus. That way I can select the cube, hold Shift to select the torus at the bottom of this list, and everything in between will be selected as well. Instead of pressing Shift to select, instead of holding Shift to select things, I can also use Control. So I can select one thing like the cylinder, and then hold Control and select something else like the cube. And it's not going to select everything in between this time. It's just going to select two things that I wanted selected. So holding Control, I can now select the torus, the mesh, the teddy bear mesh. I can unselect everything. I can select the cube, hold Control, select the torus. Nothing in between gets selected as well. So that's great. And I can also just hold Control to deselect one object at a time. Because if I had all of these selected together and I were to just click, the mesh, then that would deselect everything. But if I wanted to deselect just one thing at a time, I would hold Control and just select one thing at a time, like the bear, then the cylinder, then the torus, then the cube. We glided over this the last time we got into the toolbox here, but I have now selected the lasso tool. The lasso tool doesn't really have a shortcut compared to the selection, the move, the rotate, and the scale. That's because you're not going to be really using the lasso tool all that much. I don't find it that useful at all, but let's just discuss it real quick. The lasso tool, essentially, you just hold the left mouse button, and you can just make a selection like this. And it's another way of selecting objects. But compared to the regular selection tool, I find the lasso tool to be lacking. I mean, it works. Obviously, I'm grabbing everything here. I can make more precise grabs in some cases, but in other cases, I don't know. I just don't find the lasso tool to be all that useful. But there it is. It's right below the selection tool. It doesn't really have a shortcut compared to the selection tool, or again to the move tool, or the rotate tool, or the scale tool. Again, it's because people don't really use this tool all that much, but it is something to be aware of. It is right there, and it works like this. Hold left mouse and drag. Select your stuff that way. You can hold shift to deselect certain objects. Holding shift to select these two and deselect this. You can do all the same kind of stuff that you can with the regular selection tool. It's just, I find this to be a little less precise when you have the ability to select within the outliner and just regular drag selecting like this. All right, let's go ahead and get into component mode now. This will be the mode that actually allows us to model and manipulate objects so that we can shape and mold things from primitives into actual realized objects like this teddy bear that Professor Boyle made, or like this stuff that I have previously made. By the way, what I just did here, I hid these three things just by selecting them all. Again, selecting one, then holding shift, selecting, it's like the third one, it selects everything in between. And then I just pressed Control H to hide it. It grays it out here in the outliner, and the selection is now hidden in my viewport, and I can reintroduce all that stuff into the scene just by selecting everything in the outliner again and hitting Shift H on my keyboard. So Control H hides, Shift H, oh, let me select everything again. Shift H brings everything back. Anyway, component mode is going to be what allows us to model and shape and mold our primitives into being just basic cylinders and cubes and toruses and cones and etc., into actual created objects like this teddy bear Professor Boyle made, or these three things that I previously made before. So let's go ahead and actually select one of these. I'm going to select my aardvark here. I'm going to press F to center my camera in on it. And now we're going to enter component mode. You enter component mode just by holding the right mouse button over an object. And you see we have object mode here. This is what we've been working in this entire time for the previous 3 weeks. Now we're going to jump into either edge or vertex or face. This is component mode. Component mode broken down as vertices, points that we can manipulate and move around just as we've been moving around objects. Edges, where we can do the same thing, but to edges. And faces, where we can do the same thing, but to various faces of an object. We're going to start in vertex mode, and we're not going to really get too deep into the modeling toolkit. Like I said, future videos are going to be about the modeling toolkit. Here, I just want to review that all of the selection tools that we've been using for the basic objects also work in selection mode. So, for example, we can select vertices. We can deselect vertices by clicking outside the area. We can hold shift and select multiple vertices. We can mouse drag select to select a great number of vertices at once. Anything that is within our mouse selection will be selected. We'll talk about this more in future videos, but be careful when you mouse drag select multiple vertices like this, because it will also select everything in the back, which may not be what you want at any given point in time. But this selects multiple vertices. We can hold shift to deselect some vertices here. And then we can mouse drag again, and that will invert our selection just like it did with the just as it did with the regular objects. We can use Control to also deselect things. As long as we hold Control down, anything that's been selected will be deselected, and anything that hasn't been selected won't be selected. So it's a safer way of deselecting little points on a model. Just holding Control and clicking on whatever has been selected previously to deselect it. Unselecting everything, I can jump over to our lasso tool. We can use the lasso tool just as we could in object mode. Again, I don't find the lasso tool to be all that useful, but you can use it if you want to select certain, to make certain selections if you want. And again, you can hold Control, that'll deselect some stuff. Holding shift when things are already selected will invert that selection. Not holding shift, but just, making a selection will select a whole bunch of vertices. Looking at this model, something else we can do is selecting multiple vertices in a line. So to do that, we can just select a vertice. In this case, I'm going to select this one. And holding shift on my keyboard, I'm going to double click a vertice further down this row, and that will select all the vertices in a row. Let's go ahead and hold the right mouse button. Now I'm going to jump over to edge mode so I can start selecting edges. Same kind of thing that I can do here. Hold shift, select multiple edges at once. Hold control to deselect. Drag to select multiple edges. Hold shift to invert that selection. I can select one edge here and then double click on an edge further down a line and it will select all the edges in between. I can just double click an edge without holding anything else on my keyboard to select that entire edge loop. Edge loops are something that we will get into in future videos. I can hold shift and double click another edge to select another edge loop. Hold shift, select another edge loop. Hold shift, select another edge loop. Now I'm going to hold control to deselect these particular two edge loops. Jumping over now, holding the right mouse button, going down into face mode. Same thing with faces. I can select faces one at a time. I can hold shift to select multiple faces. Control to deselect. Shift to deselect faces that have already been selected. I can drag to select multiple faces at once. Drag while holding shift to invert my selection. I could use the lasso tool here too. I can do it with the edge mode too, but I decided not to. But I can use lasso mode in all three versions with vertices, with edges, and with faces. I can select one face here, and then holding shift, I can double click a face further down the line. That will select all the faces in between. Can double click one face and select all the faces at once. That's not something that works with edge mode. When you double click an edge, that just selects the edge loop. When you double click a vertex, that will select all the vertices, similar to how face mode, double clicking a face will select all of the faces for you. Continuing on with the selection, we can select, let's say we select, let's select these faces right here in the leg. And now we can go up to select. We can select grow, and we can grow that selection intelligently. And we can do it again and grow it. We can select, we can shrink it. Select, we can shrink it. I'm seeing here that we have grow along loop and shrink along loop. Let's see what that does. Interesting. Interesting. I believe these kinds of things also work with edge mode, but let's just test real quick. Yes, it does. Growing along loop. Growing along the loop, and then of course we can shrink it along the loop if we want to. Just another way of selecting multiple things without having to worry about selecting things from the other side of the model. Because again, let's show this in face mode. It's easier in face mode. If you're just dragging to select a whole bunch of faces on any particular object that you're working with, it's going to also select faces on the other side. There are ways to mitigate this, but you just have to be careful. You just have to realize that when you're selecting faces on one side, you're selecting faces on the other. In this case, what I would do is just hold control, just select all those faces to unselect them, and now the only faces I have selected are the ones on this side of the model, which is what I want in this case. Real quick, before I move on, I was testing out that grow and shrink thing. So let's select some vertices here. I want to see real quick if the vertices also grow and shrink. Yes, they do. Do they grow along the loop? Yes, they do. And I can shrink them. And I can shrink them. That's just another tool that you can use. It's not one that's used often, but it's here. It exists. So you may want to test it out for yourself if you'd like. Something else that may be useful to know. I've selected these vertices. Again, I'm going to go into select, grow. And if I want to keep doing that, I would have to keep going into select, keep selecting grow again and again and again and again and again. And it's kind of repetitive to have to keep going into the select menu to find grow and keep clicking that. I'm going to click it one more time. And you can press G on your keyboard, and that is a shortcut that will repeat the last menu action that you took in Maya. So since my last action was grow, it's just going to be grow every time I press G. If I go back to select, now press shrink, and now just press G on my keyboard, it's going to keep repeating the last action, which is just shrinking again and again and again. Let's do that with faces so it's easier to see. Let's select these 4 faces, select, grow. Now to repeat that action real fast, I'm just going to press G on my keyboard again and again and again and again and again. If I want to shrink, I'm going to go to select, shrink, and then G on my keyboard, nothing else, to repeat that action again and again and again and again. Now let's talk about the last item in our toolbox here. Again, we have the selection tool, lasso, move, rotate, and scale. We also have this, which is, if we hover over long enough, it should just tell us. It is the paint selection tool. It selects components in the scene by painting. Actually, let me go back to selection tool real quick. I'm going to select my aardvark again. I'm just going to get into vertex mode just so it's much easier to see what we're going to be doing. Now I'm going to go into paint select mode. Paint select mode just allows you to paint your selection. And it doesn't paint on the other side. So that's a nice way to establish some control if you wanted to. But you may find that the initial default settings for the paint selection tool are not all that useful. So I'm just going to click out here, now go back to the paint selection tool. And instead of just clicking it once, I'm going to double click it to open its tool settings. Every single one of these tools has tool settings. Commonly, we're not going to be entering the tool settings for selection or move or rotate or scale, but you can if you want to. And something we may talk about later is soft selection, which would be one of the only reasons you would enter the tool selection, the tool settings for any tool outside of paint selection. Soft select would be one of the only reasons you would enter these settings, but this is something we'll get into later. So let's just double click into paint settings here. One of the good things that you should always do, a good rule of thumb anytime you open up one of these tool settings for the first time, is just reset the tool. Just, you never know what kind of minor changes may have been made and how that could affect things. So every time you just open one of these up, just reset it real quick. Just click reset, and that should get everything back into its default. So we have our paint selection tool here. We have our brush settings here. We can adjust the radius. Great. I'm going to reset because I want to show that we can hold B on the keyboard, and then the left mouse button we can drag left and right to adjust the size of the brush ourselves without having to use the tool selection settings. If you need a specific value, then obviously it's better to type it in here, but if you're just eyeballing it, it's good to just hold B on the keyboard, left mouse button, just drag to whatever size fits your needs, and then you can start painting here. Holding shift to select more faces. Currently, my paint operations are set to select, so anything that I paint over or hold the left mouse button to paint over is going to be selected. But if I select the unselect here, then now anytime I paint, it's going to unselect whatever I'm painting. There we go. I'm actually going to jump in real quick to face mode so we can see this even clearer. Double click and go back into my paint selection tool. I'm going to increase the brush just a little bit. I'm going to paint. Got some faces here. Nice. Not painting on the other side. That's a very good thing about paint selection tool, but obviously this can also be somewhat inaccurate because of the size and just how many faces or vertices you may have. You may end up selecting things you don't want, but you can also just go to unselect, holding the left mouse button. Now anything I paint over is being unselected. Perfect. Select. If I were to hold Control with the paint operation being select, then I will deselect whatever I've selected. So I'll let go of Control, painting, hold Control, deselect. Going ahead and selecting various faces here. We can convert our selections. We can go into Select. We can go down to Convert Selection, and we can convert our selection of faces here into something else. So we can convert our face selection to vertices. We can convert our vertice selection to edges. You'll notice the reason I'm doing this, just to get out of paint mode now because we're done with that. I'm going to go into vertexes and real quick unselect and select a whole bunch of vertices here, which will select some there, which I'll hold control to unselect those. I've selected these vertices here. If I were to go into face mode, that selection is not saved from one component, from jumping from one component type to another. My face selection is whatever my face selection is. My edge selection is whatever my edge selection is. And my vertice selection is whatever my vertice selection is. They are three separate things. You can convert them into one another by going to select and just converting your selection from vertices to faces. So now my face selection, those random faces I had selected are unselected, and now instead it is a conversion of my vertex selection from previous. And I can take this face selection, go to select, go to convert selection, convert this into my edge selection. So now those random edges I had selected before have been deselected, and instead my new selection is now a conversion of those faces I had previously selected. All right, so we've played around with the component selection mode, basically learning how to select things properly in component selection mode. So I'm going to unselect, and now we are going to discuss how to go back into object mode. One of the common pitfalls that students find themselves in the beginning whenever they work with whenever they work in programs like this is that they may be trying to work with an object and to work with some sort of a mesh or an object in object mode, but then find they accidentally are in component mode, and weird things start happening. So how do you go from one to another? Well, you saw that we can just go edge or vertex or face, and that gets us into component mode. If we hold down the right mouse button and hover over object mode, now we are back into object mode. So now we can manipulate the whole object as one piece, as opposed to playing around with these specific points, edges, and faces of an object. Object mode lets us just play around with the whole object in of itself, which is what we want now. We want to go back into object mode. Another way you can jump back and forth is by pressing F8. F8 will jump you into component selection. It doesn't let you control which component exactly you jump into. So right now I'm in face selection. I believe that's because it was the last one that I had previously worked with. But normally it should probably default into jumping you into vertex mode. I don't find F8 to be a good way to jump back and forth. To have more control, I just like to right click so I can immediately choose if I want to work within edges or vertices or faces and just go from there. But F8 is a fast way to get back into object mode. So I would recommend, while you don't use F8 to jump into component mode, just select which component you want to work with from here. Once you're in component mode and you want to go back into object mode, it is a good idea to just press F8 on the keyboard, and that should get you back into object mode real fast, just by pressing it once or twice. Another way you can jump from component mode into object mode is up here. We are currently in selecting by object type, or we can just select by component type. Up here, it tells us that the F8 shortcut is, this is what tells us that the F8 shortcut is something that works from jumping from component mode to object mode. But we can also just select up here, and that lets us jump into component mode as well. But again, you don't have the control of choosing which type of component you're working with. So I would absolutely recommend that in order to get into component mode, I'll just click this to go back into object mode. In order to get into component mode, just hold the right mouse button, select what component you want to work with, vertices, edges, or faces. But once you're in component mode, again, you can either hover, select object mode, you can press F8, you can press F8 to go back into object mode, or you can just click up here to go back into object mode. 3 ways of getting back into object mode real fast. All right, to end this video, I'm going to select the default view here. We are going to quickly test out how knowing selection and how selection works in Maya will prove to be a very useful asset to you moving forward with modeling. So let's go ahead and just bring in a cylinder. I'm going to go into my inputs real fast to change my stuff around for it. Okay, so I have this cylinder, and what I want to do with it is delete all the faces in the top, and that's it. All I want to do is delete the faces in the top. I don't want to delete the whole thing. I just want to delete the faces that are right up here at the very top, and the faces that are here at the very bottom, and nothing in between. How would I go about doing that? Let me turn off the grid. How would I go about doing that? You would do it via selection tools and component mode. So let's go ahead and enter component mode. Ideally, when you're working with areas of an object that you intend to delete for one reason or another, face mode is the best mode to work with. You can do what I'm about to do in vertex mode or edge mode, but face mode is the most effective when you're trying to select things that you want to then delete. So what is the best way of going about deleting faces in a cylinder, or really in any model? Well, we could just marquee drag select everything, but this doesn't just select the faces at the top, it also selects this stuff here, which, we could then go through the trouble of deleting these one at a time, but that wouldn't be very effective. We could maybe use the lasso tool and select everything that way, but again, the lasso tool will select other faces that you probably don't intend to also select. Let me unselect. The paint select tool could be a good idea. You have more control. Let me make the brush bigger. You have more control over what you select, and you're not going to accidentally select other faces you may not want to select, especially if we go into our orthographic view and select top and just paint in there. And then we go back into our default view. And now we have only faces we want selected, but that can be a little tedious. That involves a lot of steps. Really, the best way of doing this is selecting just the basic selection tool. I'm going to unselect everything. I'm going to enter my front view. I'm going to very quickly hold shift and select this area here, which will select all the faces in the top plus this row, and do the same thing from the bottom. And then I'm going to hold control and just marquee select these two rows, and that deletes everything there. And now the only thing I have selected are the faces that I want selected. And now I'm going to press delete on my keyboard, and that gets rid of those faces. There are any number of ways of doing what I just did. We just went over, a couple of them. The way where I marquee selected all this stuff and then deselected this. That's one way. I could do the paint selection tool, do it this way if I wanted to. That also works. The theme of this class, and the theme of this week especially, is that Maya has multiple ways of doing the exact same thing. I am showing you multiple ways of doing the exact same thing for everything that we do in these videos. It'll be up to you to pick and choose which ways work best for you. Then, of course, there are a few ways that are going to be objectively not as useful, like just marquee drag selecting just a few faces like this. Obviously, that's not going to work. I am going to be showing you a series of ways that work well. And it'll be up to you to pick and choose the methods that you want to use, the methods that speak best to you, the methods that work most effectively for you and your workflow. So that'll be the theme of this week. That's really the theme of the whole class, of everything we've done so far. There's multiple ways of doing the exact same thing. It'll be up to you to pick and choose which way works best for you. So one more time, I'm going to delete these faces. Now I'm just going to do it the way that I prefer doing it, which is just selecting everything, then holding control just through the center, so it deselects everything except for the top and the bottom, then just delete. That's my preferred way of going about that particular task of deleting all the top faces and deleting all the bottom faces. I'll be giving you tasks like this throughout the semester, and you're going to have multiple ways of getting the job done. It'll be up to you to pick and choose which methods work best for you, which methods are most effective to you. All I'm going to be doing is just showing you a variety of ways of doing the exact same thing. With that, we are done with this video. We have gone over selection tools. Next time, we are going to start looking at the modeling toolkit and actually manipulating our vertices, our edges, and our faces to mold and shape basic primitives into whatever you want to mold and shape them into. So thank you very much. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.